In the halls of American law, few moments shake the system like a unanimous Supreme Court decision. On December 2, 2025, the court's 9-0 ruling didn't just overturn a controversial policy, it redrew the boundaries of presidential and congressional power. The justices declared with one voice that the checks and balances at the heart of the Constitution are alive and non-negotiable. The case centered on a single question: can a president unilaterally impose taxes under the guise of a national emergency? The answer: a resounding no. This verdict is more than a legal precedent. It's a reaffirmation that the power to tax and the power to shape the nation's economy belongs to Congress alone. The world watched as American democracy proved its resilience, restoring stability at home and abroad. The roots of this case run deep, tracing the ongoing struggle between Congress and the presidency. The Constitution is clear: only Congress can levy taxes and regulate foreign commerce. For generations, presidents executed trade laws, but never claimed the power to tax unilaterally. That changed as Congress, especially in times of crisis, began granting broad emergency powers to the executive. The 1952 Youngstown Steel case set a crucial limit. Presidential power is strongest with Congress's support, weakest when acting against it. The 2025 case forced the court to decide if modern emergency statutes had erased these boundaries, or if the lessons of Youngstown still held. The answer would define the limits of executive power for a new era. At the center of this high-stakes legal and political battle stood the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, commonly known as IEEPA, a law whose very purpose and meaning would soon be put to the test. Passed by Congress in 1977, IEEPA was originally designed as a safeguard, a way to rein in unchecked executive authority that had grown during previous decades. Lawmakers wanted to ensure that the president could not wield economic power unilaterally, especially in times of crisis. The law was crafted for targeted sanctions, measures like freezing assets or blocking specific transactions with foreign adversaries. It was never intended to serve as a tool for sweeping economic policy or broad trade restrictions. For decades, presidents from both parties used IEEPA in a limited way, invoking it to freeze assets or block international bank transfers in response to national security threats. Imposing tariffs, however, was always seen as outside its scope. But the Trump administration broke with decades of precedent. They argued that IEEPA's power to regulate trade also included the power to tax it, essentially, to impose tariffs without congressional approval. Critics in Congress and beyond warned that this interpretation would allow the president to bypass the legislative branch entirely, imposing massive taxes or trade barriers with nothing more than a declaration of emergency. The administration's use of IEEPA to justify tariffs, citing trade deficits and the fentanyl crisis, was widely seen as a pretext for protectionism, raising fears about the erosion of checks and balances. The legal showdown that followed would determine whether a law designed to limit executive power could instead be twisted into a tool for its greatest expansion, setting a precedent for future presidents. The stakes were enormous. Nothing less than the constitutional balance of economic power between Congress and the president, and the future of American democracy itself. In early 2025, the Trump administration invoked IEEPA to impose sweeping tariffs, 50% on India, 40% on Brazil, and 10% on Canada. These tariffs were unprecedented in their scope and scale, reversing decades of U.S. trade policy. The rates soared to levels not seen since the Great Depression, marking a significant departure from the norm. The administration cited emergencies like the fentanyl crisis and trade deficits as justifications. However, the evidence supporting these claims was thin. Canada, for example, accounted for a tiny fraction of fentanyl seizures. Critics argued that these measures were more about political posturing than addressing real issues. The economic fallout was immediate. Businesses faced soaring costs, and consumers paid higher prices for everyday goods. The tariffs disrupted supply chains, leading to delays and shortages. Consumers felt the pinch as prices for groceries, electronics, and other essentials climbed. The increased costs were passed down the line, affecting every American household. Global supply chains were thrown into chaos. Allies retaliated with their own tariffs, hurting American exporters and isolating the U.S. on the world stage. The move was widely seen as executive overreach, bypassing Congress and upending the rules-based trading system. Outrage from businesses and trade groups led to a legal challenge, setting the stage for a Supreme Court showdown. The question loomed large: could the president reshape the entire economy with a single emergency declaration? The answer would have consequences for every American household and business. The nation braced for a constitutional reckoning, as the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress hung in the balance. The case raced through the lower courts, both of which ruled against the administration, finding that only Congress can impose tariffs. The Supreme Court took up the case, and during oral arguments, justices from all sides expressed deep skepticism of the government's position. The administration argued that regulating trade included taxing it, but the justices pointed to the Constitution's clear separation of taxing and regulatory powers. Legal experts predicted a unanimous defeat for the president, citing the court's impatience with executive overreach and the major questions doctrine. The justices were not just ruling on tariffs, they were deciding whether to grant the modern presidency unprecedented unilateral power. As arguments closed, the only question was how forcefully the court would reassert Congress's authority. The nation waited for a verdict that would define the future of American democracy. On December 2, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a unanimous rebuke that sent shockwaves through Washington and the nation. In a landmark decision, the justices declared that the IEEPA-based tariffs were unconstitutional, striking at the heart of executive overreach. The ruling was not just a legal technicality, it was a powerful statement about the limits of presidential authority and the enduring strength of the Constitution. The court ruled decisively that only Congress holds the power to levy taxes, reaffirming a foundational principle of American democracy. The justices found that the language of the IEEPA did not, and could not, grant the president such sweeping authority. This decision underscored the importance of checks and balances, reminding the nation that no branch of government is above the law. As a result, the tariffs were struck down immediately, and the Treasury Department began the complex process of refunding billions of dollars to American importers. For many businesses, this meant a sudden and welcome reversal of months of financial strain. As long-awaited relief finally arrived, the markets responded with enthusiasm. Stock prices soared, traders celebrated on the exchange floor, and business owners across the country breathed a collective sigh of relief. The economic uncertainty that had gripped the nation for months began to lift, replaced by renewed optimism and confidence in the rule of law. The decision's language was unambiguous. The power to tax is the most essential of all legislative powers, and it was placed in the hands of Congress for a reason. This clear affirmation of constitutional principles resonated far beyond the courtroom, echoing through the halls of government and into the public consciousness. Leaders from both parties, often divided on so many issues, came together to hail the ruling as a vital restoration of constitutional order. The decision was seen as a rare moment of unity, reinforcing the idea that the nation's founding principles still guide its future. For millions of Americans, the impact was immediate and tangible. Lower prices at the store, more stable jobs, and a return to predictable economic policy brought a sense of normalcy and hope to families, workers, and consumers across the country. In the end, the Supreme Court had not just interpreted the law, it had defended the very structure of American government, ensuring that the balance of power envisioned by the founders would endure for generations to come. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through Washington and around the world. By stripping the president of unilateral tariff power, the court forced future administrations to work with Congress on trade policy. The removal of tariffs brought instant relief to businesses and consumers, lowering prices and boosting economic growth. Foreign governments rolled back retaliatory measures, and global markets stabilized. The ruling restored faith in the U.S. as a reliable trading partner and strengthened international alliances. For ordinary Americans, the effects were tangible, cheaper goods, more secure jobs, and a renewed lesson in the power of constitutional checks and balances. The decision proved that the system, though slow and contentious, is designed to prevent the concentration of power. Democracy, once again, had prevailed. Legal scholars across the spectrum agreed. The administration's use of IEEPA was a step too far. The Supreme Court's decision rested on the plain language of the law. Regulate does not mean tax. The major questions doctrine demanded clear congressional authorization for sweeping economic actions, and IEEPA simply didn't provide it. The ruling drew on the 1952 Youngstown precedent. When the president acts against Congress, his power is at its weakest. The 9-0 verdict reaffirmed that even in emergencies, the president cannot usurp Congress's core constitutional duties. The wisdom of the court, grounded in history and law, left no doubt the power of the purse belongs to Congress alone. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision is more than a ruling on tariffs, it's a defining moment for American democracy. By restoring the power to tax and regulate trade to Congress, the court re-established a critical check on executive authority. The precedent will make it far harder for future presidents to bypass Congress on major economic decisions. The decision protects Americans from the volatility and risks of unchecked executive power. It's a reminder that the power to tax must remain in the hands of the people's representatives. The court has reset the boundaries, but the ongoing debate over presidential power continues. This ruling is a recommitment to the democratic process and the enduring strength of the Constitution. In the wake of this constitutional earthquake, the foundations of the Republic stand stronger than ever.